good morning. How are you today? Okay. It is great to see you so much. I'm a morning person, so when I get that kind of response, I'm like, okay, I've got a bunch of people who stayed up too late last night, and here they are, right? So I won't make you say it again. I'm glad you're here. It's so great to see you. I always love showing up to see you, and I love being a part of this church family, and I call it that on purpose because that's what church should be, is a family. In fact, if you don't feel like you're feeling the family vibe of this place, I want to challenge you to do something about that. Let's make some moves. In fact, one of the things that we've been doing all summer, and I'm going to invite you to do again, is to act like a family today. So what do families do? And I was thinking about this just a minute ago. I was thinking, like, when our family goes to a movie, what we do is we go in, you either bought the stuff online or you get it, you go in, you get your stuff to eat, and you go get to your seats, and you have these assigned seats, and you sit down, and hopefully you're in the good place and you get to relax and lean back. And I'm a weirdo. I've got to wipe off that seat because I get creeped out that somebody else already sat in it, and I got my stuff, and here we are, we're going to watch a movie, and it's great. And then when the movie's over, you know what we do? We just leave. Like, we don't go out there and talk to the staff at the movie place, like, hey, how's your life? What's going on, right? It's like, hey, what's been going on? You had a good summer? I mean, we're not those people. We don't do that, right? Why? Because you're not a family with everybody in the movie, and you're not a family with the people who are running the movie theater. But that's not church. In fact, church is a family, and so when we hang out and we get to know each other and you get to know each other, and together we learn more about each other, there is a connection there. And so I'm telling you, it is the number one thing I hear today, is that this connection is missing for so many people. I felt it myself. I know some of you have felt it, and that's why today after the service we're going to ask you to hang around for just a little bit. In fact, we've got some snacks out on the patio out on this side. And in Liberty Hill, same. We've got some stuff for you. There's some games to play out there. There's some hang out, meet somebody, learn somebody's name so that next week you know somebody. And that is the beginning of relationship in a church family, and it just goes from there. And so I want to just ask you to take that step today. If church doesn't feel like a family, I'm asking you not to come in and just consume church, but to hang around for a few minutes and actually feel the relationship part of church today, because that's literally what church is and should be for each of us. And I've said every week, I understand if you got to go, you got to go, and that's okay with us. We understand schedules as well, but we want that invitation to be put out to you, and we would love to know you and know who you are. So please hang out with us for just a little bit today, if you absolutely possibly can, and let's get to know each other a little better, and let's act like family today, not like we just went to a movie and got something and left. Well, I'm glad that you're here for a lot of reasons today. One of those reasons is because we've covered a lot in this series so far. And so if you're a guest and this is your first time with us, let me just tell you a little bit about what we've covered so far in this series called Games We Play. We're talking about the family. So this is our family edition. We've talked about the control game. The control game just says, I'll fix you, because I clearly can see where you need to be fixed. And you've got some things that need fixing, and I am absolutely the one to do that. And what we discovered in this particular message that Adam brought to us is that there's a better game to play, and the better game is the surrender game, not the control game. And so we've learned that. That's on YouTube. You can go catch up on that. It's a great one to catch up on. Last week we covered this one, the blame game, which is just equals like, this is not my fault. Yes, I said a few words. Yes, I slammed the door. Yes, I did something and you didn't know I was going to do that. And I've got a part in this, but honestly, 99% of our problem is actually your fault. And so what we learned last week is that there is a better game than the blame game. The better game is the own it game, that you literally own your part. And again, I challenge you to go catch back up. These will help you. These will help your family. And so far what we've said is this, is that when it comes to a relationship, a game that requires a loser is a game that nobody wins. Because when one person wins and one person loses, it creates a distance and a fracture in that relationship. And you may get your way, but you end up losing something along the way. And here's why that's the case. And this has actually been the driving principle of this entire series. And the principle has been a question. And for those of you who've been around, this is the principle. For those of you who are just learning it, here it is. It's a question. When it comes to family relationship, think about it for a minute. What is the win? What is the win in a family relationship? If you've been around for a little bit, we know the answer is simply this. The answer is the relationship. That's the win. It's not whether you won or lost the argument. The win is a mutually satisfying, mutually enjoyable relationship. There's not an individual win. And if there's an individual win and an individual loss, it's just all loss, relationally speaking. If somebody loses, it's a loss. The win in your most important relationships, which by the way is your family, is in fact the relationship. Today, we're going to talk about another game that we play in our families. In fact, we play this out. I don't know how many of you in your families play cards, but we have several card games we like to play. And we play this out in our card games all the time, the game we're going to talk about today. We may not know we were playing it out, but we play it out. I don't know how many of you have ever, maybe your family plays poker, right? I don't know what that is. I know for our family, we have two games that we really like. We play with cards. One of them is the game of golf, and there's a way to play that. And then the other one is one called Rich Man, Poor Man. And we love both of those. We play those in our house. They're kind of fast-paced, and we like those. But what's interesting is we play these out in our home with cards, and what we're doing, in poker, everybody's got a tell, right? Everybody, and so what are you doing? If you're a good poker player, you're literally, yes, you may be watching the cards, but you're also watching everybody at the table and watching for their flinch, for their expression, or for the way that they react to something. Recently, we were playing a card game in our family, and it was one of those that if you lost, they got to pick a card from yours, and one of our family members was doing this with their cards. It's like, okay, you pick, which one do you want to pick? Right? And I was like, is this like, what are you doing with that? And they were clearly trying to get them to pick this card, but really what they knew about that person is that they were never going to pick that card. So they put the card they wanted to keep up there, and the person drew from the other side because they knew they were not going to give in to their prompting, right? See, we do this kind of thing in our families with our games, and all different kinds of games that we play, and it comes out. And so today what we're talking about is a game that is potentially the most undetectable game we play in our families. But I'm telling you, it may very well be the most harmful game that we play in our families. And so today what I'm talking about, and what I want us to talk about, is the assume game. Because I know you always, and I know you never, and so I assume you're going to repeat that. I know how you are. I've seen you, so I assume I know what you're going to do. I know which card you're going to pick. Assumptions lead to shutdowns. Because we stop being open and receptive to the other person. We stop trying to connect. We stop making an effort and even walk away from a relationship, oftentimes all based on our own assumptions that I already know what you're thinking. I already know why you did that. I already know what you're going to do. Assuming creates tension, and assuming creates conflict. And if we assume we know what another person thinks or why they did what they did, it causes that person to feel judged. It causes that person to feel trapped or like they're not ever even given a chance. And the end result is that assumptions leave you feeling secretly lonely. Because with assumptions, what we do is we end up building a fortress around ourselves that leaves other people on the outside of it. Assuming is a need to control others and situations. Assumptions help you feel like you're in the driver's seat. You're in control of the relationship. Assuming, it's hard to detect in your family relationships sometimes, but once you see it, once you can recognize it, it is time to play another game. Julie and I have talked a lot about the assuming game in our families. I know in my family of origin, this was a game we played a lot, not necessarily about each other, although that did happen. We ended up playing this game about other people a lot. Julie's family was the same, except they played it more internally, to where when I came into the family, I did certain things as a young guy that 30 years later, they're just assuming that I'm the same person. Julie and I's family has tended to blend some of that together, and we've done some of this internally and externally as well. And assuming, again, if you're not careful, it's hard to detect in your family. But once you recognize, oh my goodness, we are an assuming family, it is time to play another game. And so today I want to talk about a better game, and today I want to call our better game the happy game. And this game makes all the difference. So what is the happy game that makes all the difference? And the answer to that question we find in a letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to some Christians in the first century in the city of Corinth. Corinth was a city of pagan God worshipers, and all of these people were brand new followers of Jesus. And so Paul had to help them understand how to follow a different God, because in pagan worship, the gods didn't care about the people. In fact, they believed the gods toyed with and manipulated people, but they didn't really care about people. And so Paul shows up and says, okay, this God that I've introduced you to is completely different than anything you've ever known. Because this God actually cares about people. And so in order for you to please this God, it's not about sacrificing a goat or a sheep or even your babies, as you've done in some cases. In order to please this God, you actually treat people the way your God treats you. Meaning, you are to love the people around you the way that this God has loved you and treated you. And the old version was, I'm going to treat God the way God wants to be treated, so he'll be happy with me. And Paul spends several chapters in this letter, and he's just finished explaining to them, okay, if you want to do that religious please God thing, knock yourself out. That's fine. But don't forget that the way you treat people is the number one sign of how much you love God. And so in this particular chapter, he explains it. Now, this is like one of the most popular chapters in all of Scripture. Somebody may have read some of this at your wedding. I may have read parts of this at your wedding. It's one of my favorites to talk about in weddings. It's often called the love chapter of the Bible. And I'll just tell you, almost all of it makes sense. But there's one line in this chapter that doesn't make sense. And in that line is the secret to the happy game. And so these may be familiar words that you've heard before. You may have a few of them memorized. You may can quote a few of them. You may have heard people say these. And then we're going to get to this one line that doesn't make any sense, and we're just going to camp out on that for a little bit. And so here's what Paul says. Paul says, if I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. Now, he's just finished trying to tell them in the chapters before, like, look, because in their religion, they would literally try to speak the language of the gods or the language of the angels. And so he's finishing telling them, cool, if you want to do that as a part of your religious experience, you knock yourself out. But don't kid yourself that that's the main thing. Even if you did somehow you tapped into the language of angels, but you don't have love, all that language you're saying is just making a lot of noise. Now, this verse, just to kind of get personal, is also a really great reminder to all of us that you should never judge someone like me or a preacher or a speaker or a teacher. You should never judge someone who does what I do based on their speaking skills or knowledge of the Bible. Because speaking skills are a talent. Somebody has developed those, something that somebody developed. It's just like you. You've got some talents, and you've developed those talents, and you've gotten better at them. And so if you really want to know what kind of person I am, or a pastor is, or a teacher is, what kind of Jesus follower I am, ask my wife. Ask my kids. Ask the people around me, my friends, because a talent or ability is not necessarily a good representation of spirituality or a great gift. Love is always the bottom line. And so Paul goes on and he says this. He says, if I have the gift of prophecy, like I can speak and I can tell you what's happening and what's coming, and I can fathom all mysteries and have all knowledge, right? Like I'm the smartest person in the room. And if I have a faith that can move mountains, but I do not have love, I'm nothing. And there it is again. Literally, Paul says, even if I'm the smartest person in whatever room I walk into, I know more than everybody. I can literally explain anything. And like we think of that spiritually as like, oh, they know the Bible. They can explain anything about the Bible. They can answer any of the questions that somebody has about that. Yeah, but if they don't have love, they're literally a nobody, which is another great lesson for another day. Paul says, knowledge does not equal deep. Spiritual knowledge does not equal spiritually deep. You want to meet someone who is deep spiritually as a follower of Jesus, knowledge is not how you measure that. Love is how you measure that. And then he says this. He says, if I give all that I possess, not just 10%, not 20%, but I give all that I possess to the poor, and I give my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I literally gain nothing. And Paul is saying, look, anybody who gives to get gets nothing from God. Anybody who gives to gain gains nothing. But here's the question. What is have love? Like when we say have love, I gotta have love. I do not have love. I'm sure if we did a survey here this morning and I just said to you, how many of you have love? I think everybody would be like, oh yeah, I have love. And I would say, what does that mean? And I think most people would say, I don't know, but I know I have it. Because when you hear the phrase have love, it sounds like something on the inside, doesn't it? Like, I have love. I possess love. Like, I feel compassion towards people who are going through a hard time. I feel sorry for those kids, or I feel sorry for that couple. I feel bad for what they're going through. So, of course, I have love. But Paul is trying to make it clear to these first century ex-pagan followers of Jesus that this isn't actually an internal thing. And so he just gets really, really practical to explain it. He says, when I say have love, here's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about stuff you actually do. Love, the kind of love I'm talking about, he goes on, and now he goes on this list, and he says, the kind of love I'm talking about is it's patient. It puts someone else first. It goes to the back of the line. And it's kind. Like it meaning I defer to you. I know what I know, and you know what you know, but that's not what's important. I'm just going to defer to you. I'm being kind. And then he says, love does not envy. Like, it's not jealous. When you're more talented than me, when you get more attention than me, when you're the life of the party, when you tell the joke, when you get the joke and I don't, look, it's all good. Even if I do get it, love doesn't envy that in you. And then it says love doesn't boast. It doesn't boast. Love doesn't one up and shut up people. It's like, you thought that was a great story. Let me tell you my story. No, I'm going to let you shine. I'm going to let you be center stage. I'm going to let all the attention stay on you. And I'm not going to rob you of that because love doesn't envy. I'm not going to boast about me. And then he says this, love is not proud, and love does not dishonor others. In other words, love decides if this is dishonoring to you, I'm just not going to do it. I would actually be sinning against you to dishonor you. And so if it's dishonoring, it's off limits. And then he says, it is not self-seeking, and all of a sudden we're right back to that moving to the back of the line thing, right? And he says, is not easily angered. doesn't have a temper. And then here we go. This is a big one. Love keeps no record of wrongs. I mean, come on, who could do that? But wouldn't you love to be in a relation with somebody who doesn't keep a record of your wrongs? And then he says something a little bit tricky that we're going to come back to. He says, love does not delight in evil, but it rejoices with the truth. And then he's just kind of gives us sort of a rapid fire list of what love is to wrap this thing up. And he says that love always protects. Love always trusts. Love always hopes, and love always perseveres. Now, there's one of these in this list, this rapid fire list, that if you pay attention to it, it might bother you because it doesn't make any sense. Because one of these is not completely dependent on the lover, it's also dependent on the lovee. And it's this one right here. Always trust. See, that's sort of stupid in a relationship, isn't it? And probably a little bit naive to always trust. I can always protect a person even if they're wrong. I can always hope that things get better. And persevere sounds like, well, there's going to be some struggles, but I think we can push through this. We can persevere. But always trust? That kind of sounds like I always believe everything, like I'm not skeptical of anything. Like love just defaults to trust. And let me tell you, this is the cornerstone. Always trust is the cornerstone habit of the happy game. Let me illustrate it this way. In every relationship, not just romantic relationships, but in every relationship, marriage, parents with their kids and family, and we could go outside the family, but all kinds of relationships. From time to time, what happens is there is something that happens that is an expectation. We think there's a certain expectation of what someone should do. So there's an expectation. They said this is what they're going to do, and so sure, I'll be there by 6 to pick you up, or I'll pick the kids up, or yeah, I'll have dinner ready for you, and I'll make sure that I tell them all of that. And so you're expecting them to do either what they said they were going to do or what you thought they were going to do. The problem is that there's also what we experience. Right? So there's expectations. This is what they said. This is what I was thinking was going to happen. And then there's what we experience. In relationship, from time to time, there is a gap between what we expected and what we experienced. And every single time that this gap shows up, what we expect, between what we expect and what we expected, every single time, there's a choice that we make of what game are we going to play right here. Typically, we play one particular game, but today we're trying to talk about a different game. Every time there's a gap between what we were told, what they led us to believe they were going to do, and then what they actually did when there was a gap. Whenever things don't line up, we choose what to put in the gap. We choose what game to play. So, there's a couple of games that we can play, and you know the game that we typically play. It's the game we started off talking about, and that is to assume the worst. That's our go-to because we know them. They always, they never. She did it again. He did it again. I kind of expected it. This is how it usually is. Or we can choose a different game. And this game is the cornerstone. What we learned is the cornerstone element here that Paul gave us in 1 Corinthians 13 is to believe the best. I know why he's late. I know why she didn't. I'm not positive how that all turned out that way. I don't know why they didn't follow through. But you know what? I'm sure, here's what believing the best looks like. Here's what the happy game looks like. I'm sure they have a good explanation. And I'm sure that when I get all of the information, I'm sure that it's going to make sense. Great family relationships make it a habit to choose the best. The happy game is built on always trust. And in the moment, it doesn't feel like you have any choice because they said this and this is what you experienced. You expected them to come through, but this is what you experienced. And in the moment, it doesn't feel like you have a choice. But every single time there's a gap between what I was told or led to believe or what I was promised, every time that this gap happens between what I actually experienced over what I was told, he didn't come through. She was late again. I don't know where she is. I don't know what happened. I don't know why he did that. I don't know why she didn't. Every time that there's a gap in your relationship, we make a choice of what game we're going to play to put there. And we either assume the worst or we play the happy game. And we choose to believe the best until they just can't believe the best anymore. Look, this is foundational habit for the happy game. Always trust by believing the best. Now, that's what Paul wrote a couple of thousand years ago. And from all of Paul's statements, here's his recommendation, and this is so powerful. The recommendation is this: in a relationship, find the most generous explanation. When there is a gap between what I expected and what I experienced, come up within your mind the most generous explanation of the other person's behavior and then believe that explanation. Just decide to believe it, to trust it. Believes all things, always trust. Choose to believe the best. Now, obviously, there are things that make this challenging and difficult. And I've been doing this a long time, and so let me just tell you, I'm not naive. There are obstacles to this. But even with all the objections that are going off in your head right now, I don't want you to miss the point. Every single time that there's a gap, even when it's the same gap over and over and over, every single time, what you place here, you get to decide. Every time. And you will either believe the best or you will assume the worst, but whichever way you go, it is a choice you get to make every single time in the relationship. Now, let me just tell you, there are a couple obstacles here, right? One of the obstacles is simply what we experienced. Maybe this time, maybe last time, maybe the last 12 times before. Yeah, right, but he did it again, she did it again. It's like clockwork. I know what they're gonna do. That's an obstacle that causes us to assume the worst. But there's another obstacle that we got to talk about if we're going to be honest, and the other obstacle is who we are. Not just what they did or didn't do, but who we are, because let's be honest, we didn't show up in our family with a clean slate, did we? We showed up with all of our stuff and all of our baggage and all of our mommy and daddy wounds and our brother wounds and that boyfriend that I stayed with way too long only to find out I was only one of three and all those wounds, right? We bring all that stuff in too. So some people have a more difficult time trusting than others because we bring our history and we bring our fear and we bring our insecurities. And because of that, there are certain things that trigger certain reactions in all of us, and we can't help that. We brought that with us. But here's what I want you to hear in spite of all of that. Even with all the stuff you brought in, even with all the inconsistency of the person that you're in a relationship with, the happy game is still a choice every single time. And so with all that in mind, I want to go back now and look at the verse in 1 Corinthians 13 that was a little tricky, but helps us to lean into this very powerful idea that we get to choose what goes in the gap every single time. And it's verse 6. That love does not delight in evil, but it rejoices with the truth. You know what that means? Love isn't trying to catch someone doing something wrong. Love isn't building up a case against someone so you can finally step in and say, aha, you did it. You did this and this and this. Love doesn't keep score of the past. Instead, love protects the relationship from suspicion and a lack of trust. Love knows that whatever I choose to put right here in this gap will always impact the relationship. Yes, this is what I thought they were going to do. Yes, they didn't do what I thought they were going to do, and we'll have to deal with that. We're going to have to talk about that. But here's what I want you to know, that what you and I put in the gap will perhaps impact the relationship as much as the gap that they created. Love always trusts. Love thinks about it long enough to come up with a generous explanation. I'm not going to allow myself to assume the worst and just go negative. Love decides I'm not going to create an environment that basically sets the other person to fall into a trap that I laid for them with my own expectations of them. Love is determined to trust anyway. And so here's the question. Based on your personality, based on your experience, based on what you know about yourself, do you find that when there's a gap, that you believe the best, or do you assume the worst? Based on who you know, which way do you go? What you know about yourself, which way do you go? Do you believe the best? That when there's a gap, you know what? I'm sure there's a good reason. Or you're like, he better have a good reason. She better have a good reason for this. I'm already mad. I don't even have all the info and I'm already mad. And so when they get home, when they finally call, when she finally texts back, it's going to take a whole lot of, I know. Which way do you go? I just want you to know, regardless of who you are in relationship with or what that struggle is inside of your family, what he's like, she's like, they're like, it is your choice every single time what you put in that gap. But Shane, he did it. I know. I know. I have a family too. I know. But it's always, always, always your choice what you put in the gap between what you expected, even if they told you they would, and what you experienced. Besides, let's think about it this way. What are the options? I mean, plan B? Is that going to get you anywhere? Here's plan B. Here's some options in case you want to think this through. Plan B is enjoy uncovering mistakes, thrive on speculation, assume the worst, embrace doubt. Now imagine that you're sitting down with your kids who are about to get married and you're going to give them some advice on how to raise a successful family. I mean, how much of this advice would you actually give your kids? Basically, honey, lay a trap. He's going to step into it eventually, and then you can say, aha, I knew you were going to do that. I knew it was going to happen. No, you wouldn't say that. You would say, you know what? When there's a gap, and let me tell you, honey, there's going to be gaps. You get to decide what goes in the gap. And you're always going to come out better if you start the habit in the relationship of believing the best. Because you won't live your life playing the assuming game. You'll literally get to live your life playing the happy game. Now, does this mean you don't have difficult conversations? No, of course you have difficult conversations. And when it's the same thing over and over and over, of course you talk about it. But as soon as that conversation is over, you get right back to the happy game, because now that's in the past and we're not going to keep score. Even if the last 10 times there was no good excuse, this 11th time, I'm going to come out with a generous explanation. I'm going to choose to believe the best because there's a better game than playing the assuming game. There's a better choice. And it's a choice that you can make every single time you decide to choose what you put in the gap between what you expected and what you experienced. And it's the happy game. And it is a better game to play. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you for Paul and the writings that teach us to know a little bit more about what love looks like. Help us with this very challenging choice in our relationships. And for all that we bring to the table ourselves, for all that our family is and who they are and what we know about them, God, would you help us to realize that as these gaps happen, we literally have a choice every time. Would you bring that to mind today when the gap gets created? Would you bring that to mind as we go through this week, because we know this happens daily with different people in our family. And God, would you help us to choose the happy choice, the happy game. That's a better choice and is more like you and what you've done for us. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.